Welcome to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. Over the next half an hour, we'll be looking beyond the business headlines by giving you in-depth perspective on the stories that are affecting all of us. Coming up on today's show, the dramatic FBI search of Donald Trump's Florida home on Monday has reignited the fragility of the world's largest economy. Greg Swenson, the founding partner of investment firm Brink and the chairman of Republicans Overseas UK, will be joining me here in the studio for his take on the inevitable fallout. And the high-stakes presidential election in Kenya has put East Africa's largest economy in the spotlight as Western allies are hopeful for a peaceful transition of power. Robin Gwynne, the former senior British diplomat and director of the communications firm Whiteleaf Solutions, will also be joining me in the studio for some analysis. Then later, I'll be looking back at some of the biggest business stories of the week. But first, as always, let's start the show with a topic that's dominated headlines here in the UK this week: the spiralling cost of living crisis. Despite analysts forecasting that the energy price cap could rise above £5,000 by the start of next year, Prime Minister Boris Johnson has doubled down on his insistence that it is for his successor to make a significant financial decision. This is after crisis talks with energy bosses ended with no new measures to ease the burden on households.
I want British businesses and British people to understand we're moving in the right direction and the pressures are being reduced. So that's a very important priority. Priority two is getting the economy growing and sending a real signal to the world and British business that we're on their side and we want to open up opportunities and we want to see new investment. And the third thing we've got to do is really get a grip of waiting lists in the NHS, GPs appointments and dentist appointment.
If you support a plan that Liz is suggesting, which says she doesn't believe in doing that, doesn't believe in providing direct financial support to those groups of people, and that's what she said, because she thinks her tax cut is going to help them, which it is not, we are going to, as a Conservative government, leave millions of incredibly vulnerable people at the risk of real destitution.
Well, earlier I spoke with our business correspondent Simon Pusey in Westminster for more on this story. Simon, a lot of political pundits are saying this Conservative battle for the leadership is going on far too long. We're seeing too much of the candidates and they're not talking about the pressing issues, which of course is the soaring energy bills. The Prime Minister has doubled down, saying he's not getting involved until his successor is chosen. What on earth is going on?
Yeah, a lot of people criticising that move and saying that this is a zombie government. Martin Lewis is a consumer expert. He's on TV a lot. He's saying this is ridiculous, that energy bills are going to quadruple in a couple of months. Boris Johnson is countering and saying, oh, it's not protocol for actually someone in this position to get involved and change anything. And a lot of people will be asking, well, why are you even Prime Minister if you're not actually going to do any leading of the government, leading of the country? And so a lot of people coming out, I think Keir Starmer next week, so Keir Starmer is going to come out with a plan and announce, you know, some things that the Labour government would do. But he's saying, well, what are the Conservatives doing? And a lot of attention, as you say, is on Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss and on this leadership contest that it does seem to be going on a long time. Obviously, there has been that thing with MI5 coming in and saying that there might be some fraud involved or there might be some forces at work trying to disrupt that vote. But a lot of people are saying, yeah, we're seeing so many debates with them, hearing the same old thing. It looks like Liz Truss is quite a long way above from Rishi, even though he had quite a good TV debate recently. But there are these pressing things coming, the cost of living crisis and the energy bills, and soon it's going to be winter. It doesn't feel like it now, we're in the baking heat, but very soon it's going to be winter and people are not going to be able to afford to pay these bills. And so it's what is going to happen? What are the government going to do? Is there going to be some kind of grant given to families to be able to pay, because a lot of people are not going to be able to pay these energy bills. It's going to be £4,000, north of £4,000 come October, and lots of families are not going to be able to pay that.
You're absolutely right, Simon. Thank you. Well, let's stay with this cost of living crisis story, which is impacting hundreds of thousands of families living in the capital. My next guest, Reverend Nims Obunge, MBE, runs a community food hub 3 days a week, providing nutritionally balanced emergency food to the local community. Reverend Nims Obunge, MBE, DL, Deputy Lieutenant to Her Majesty the Queen. It's such a pleasure having you on Channel's Business Global. Many of our viewers may recall that we had the pleasure of being able to attend your food bank in Tottenham, which is an area many of our viewers will be familiar with. It's in North London. But for those who didn't have the opportunity to watch that report, could you remind us of exactly what the Peace Alliance are doing and the types of people that are frequenting your food bank?
Well, Gillian, it's great to be on your program again, and thank you very much. Um, well, the food bank and the food hub serves in excess of 4,000 people on our database, and every week we have approximately 500 to 600 people that we look after, providing them some sustenance for the week. And they come from different parts of London, all cultures, desperately in need post-COVID and the furlough system that was placed in by government. Many people lost their jobs, and many people were trying to get back to a sense of stability in their lives. And now we've got a different situation, which I'm sure we'll be talking about. But without a doubt, we have people from all cultures and backgrounds working with us to support these very vulnerable people.
Absolutely. For a large swathe of people, it's really difficult to comprehend that Britain, a country that you would position with prosperity, is going through the worst cost of living crisis in over 40 years. Wages are stagnating. It just costs so much more to live today than it did this time last year or for 30 odd years back. Can you describe what this means in reality? How difficult is it for people at the moment?
Julian, it's a very difficult situation to describe, I suppose, to folks who may not totally understand what the energy crisis brings, what the inflation that we have in the United Kingdom, the impact of that inflation on so many lives. But let me give you a thought. There was a time £50 in the present context would cover 12 days of energy usage in a person's home. Now, £50 in the coming months will cover about 3.5 days and no longer 12 days. Then by January, £50 will cover only about 2.8 days.
Wow.
So that same £50 is no longer going to cover 12 days. So that's just a typical example of what people are dealing with. So we have the potential of homelessness. At the moment, we already have in standard homes, people already have a deficit of £372 that they're owing because they're not able to keep up with their bills. And we anticipate from paying $1,400 for energy as a typical example, a typical household would pay about $1,400 for their bills. Come October, we're talking about it coming to something like $2,800. And there's an anticipation that by January, the same bills that was $1,400 will be rated at $4,400. Now, how do we expect with this soaring inflation and this cost of living crisis hitting our nation? How do we expect these people who come to my food bank, who come to my food hub, to stay in homes? We have to look for a solution. The government has to look for a solution that secures their future. And at the moment, because we're in a crisis of leadership in our nation, and we don't know who our next prime minister is going to be, we don't have a clear solution. There's not the former Prime Minister Gordon Brown is calling for the government to take over energy companies who will not reduce their prices. But that is a long shot. There are so many other conversations that need to happen right now.
We will pick this up at another time. Reverend Nims Obunge, MBE, Deputy Lieutenant to Her Majesty the Queen. It's always a pleasure having you on Channels Business Global. Thank you for your time today, Nims. Let's move on now to another story that's caused shockwaves across America this time. Earlier this week, federal agents searched the home of former President Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago home in Florida on Monday as part of an investigation into his handling of classified information. Mr. Trump was in New York at the time of the raid. The execution of the search warrant represents a significant escalation in the investigation that the Department of Justice has been quietly working on for months and has led to wild conspiracy theories that have fueled the former president's hardline supporters. Well, for more on this story, I was earlier joined in the studio by Greg Swenson, the founding partner of investment firm Brink and the chairman of Republicans Overseas UK. Greg Swenson, as you know, it's always a pleasure having you in the studio with me. We were supposed to be talking about this historic climate change bill, but then the FBI raided Donald Trump's home. This is the first time in the history of the United States. Republicans are saying that the FBI have been weaponized. What does that mean, and what are your thoughts on what's happened?
I'd have to agree that it's been weaponized. I mean, what you're seeing is a state apparatus being used to punish or even criminalize political opposition. I'm really disappointed, saddened to see it. It's not a good sign. It's one thing when voters or citizens maybe become radicalized or go off the grid a little bit or go fringe, but when you see actual state bureaucracies act this way, that's really troubling, and I think it's a concern for a lot of Americans. And it also explains why there is such distrust for the current Justice Department.
There were documents that were supposed to have been handed back to the National Archives.
Sure.
They weren't handed back.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't want to trivialize it, but this is kind of document stuff, not, really urgent or important things. These matters are usually handled during negotiations. President Obama took millions of pages of documents, claimed he was going to digitalize them. I'm not talking about whataboutism. Yeah. It's just, these are sort of things that are handled through negotiations. The President Trump already provided, 15 boxes of documents back in the winter. So these things are always handled through the process of negotiation. Worst case, a subpoena, which they kind of skipped that process. So yes, unprecedented, never happens, and I think, again, it's the weaponization of a state apparatus, which is really troubling.
Over the past 48 hours, Trump 2024, Civil War, they've been trending not so much on the mainstream platforms because we know a lot of them are highly regulated. Right. But I did download Truth Social, and there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of rhetoric.
Yeah.
There was that, I've got to say, really well executed campaign video, some say it wasn't, from Trump talking about the state of America at the moment. Is he going to run? Would you suggest that he is fit to become a president again?
It looks like he's going to run. Okay. I'd be surprised if he didn't. The only thing that will convince him not to run is if he starts polling very poorly. Yeah. He doesn't want to run if there's a chance that he loses. So, but right now, if the election were tomorrow, he would win comfortably.
Oh, great.
Oh, yeah, no, I mean, that's just what the polls tell me. But also the sentiment in the country. Whenever an incumbent president is polling in the low 30s, it's really hard to be reelected. Yeah. He will be primaried, President Biden, for sure. So whenever a president is primaried, he loses, even if he wins the nomination. So this is, there aren't some unprecedented trivial facts about this coming campaign, but I think President Trump will run again unless he starts polling poorly. There has been a bit of a closing in the gap between President Trump and Ron DeSantis, where a year ago, it was 75-25. Now it's kind of 45-35. I still think President Trump would win again if the primaries were tomorrow. But, a lot could change. It's still early. I think the question is, will he announce before or after the midterms? He basically had an agreement with Leader McCarthy to not announce before the midterms. I think one of the motives of the Democrats in this raid on Monday was to make the midterms about President Trump. Wow. I don't think that's good for the party. I don't think it's good for the country. Let's just have the midterms. Obviously, the Republicans will do quite well. I think if he stepped into it, and there was some pressure after the raid by his inner circle supporters that said, you've got to announce now. This is crazy. But I think this will backfire against the Democrats. The intention was to make the election about Trump. I think it's going to increase enthusiasm on the right, whether it's for President Trump or, more importantly, for the congressmen that are running for election in November.
It's always a great feasting upon your knowledge. If only I was inclined to American politics, I could tackle you more, but I can't, and we've run out of time. Greg Swenson.
Always great to be here.
Yes, founding partner of investment firm Brink. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks, Juliana.
Coming up on Channel's Business Global, Robin Gwynn, the former senior British diplomat and director of the communications firm Whiteleaf Solutions, will be joining me here in the studio to discuss Tuesday's presidential elections in Kenya, and I'll be looking back at some of the biggest business news stories of the week. All this after the break. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. In a moment, I'll be speaking with the former senior British diplomat Robin Gwynne, but before then, here's a rundown of the biggest business news stories of the week. WhatsApp has announced it's to introduce new privacy features. The Meta-owned messaging service says the changes aim to give users more control over their experience by protecting their private communications. The tweaks include the ability to block screenshots of time-limited messages, hiding one's online presence from other WhatsApp users, and leaving group chats without notifying others. Meta suffered its first ever drop in revenues in its 18-year history last month, and these security changes come at a time when governments are cracking down on big tech firms' safety standards. Elon Musk has sold $6.9 billion worth of Tesla shares to avoid what he said was an emergency sale should Twitter succeed in forcing him to close the $44 billion takeover. The world's richest man is currently embroiled in a legal battle with the social media platform after announcing last month that he would be pulling out of the deal to buy it. Twitter is suing him to enforce the sale, and the case is headed to the court in October. Over the past 12 months, the SpaceX boss has cashed out an estimated $32 billion worth of shares in the electric vehicle maker, including $8.5 billion in April. Disney Plus has overtaken Netflix with its number of streaming subscribers, with a total of 221 million customers, stealing a lead in the multi-billion-dollar streaming war. In the most recent trading update, the entertainment conglomerate also announced it would be launching an advertising-based tier of Disney Plus by the end of the year, which is expected to significantly boost revenues. In the 3 months to the end of July, the platform gained 14.4 million subscribers, far outstripping analysts' expectations of an estimated 10 million. Now to our final topic. According to Kenya's Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission, an estimated 60% of the 22.1 million registered voters casted a ballot in Tuesday's presidential election, a significantly smaller proportion than the 80% who did so 5 years ago. Electoral disillusionment has been blamed on the government's inability to tackle economic problems that have taken hold in East Africa's largest economy. Voting was reportedly largely peaceful, and the two main candidates, current Deputy President William Ruto and former Prime Minister Raila Odinga, have promised to respect the results if they deem the vote to be fair. Well, for more on this story, I was earlier joined in the studio by former senior British diplomat and director of the communications firm Whiteleaf Solutions, Robin Gwynne. Robin Gwynne, it's an absolute pleasure having you in the Channel's Business Global studio. For some people, it may be obvious as to why the result of this election and a peaceful transition of power in Kenya is of vital importance to the West and to the Horn of Africa and to the continent. But for some, they don't know the geopolitical importance. Can you just explain why Kenya is such a vital partner to Britain?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Juliana, for having me on. So I think this works on kind of two levels. There's the geopolitical aspect, as you say, which we'll try and outline. And then there's a kind of deeper symbolic long-term aspect to it. So on the pure geopolitics, I think Kenya has established itself as a very vibrant democracy, as a kind of regional powerhouse, both politically, economically. There are many companies who have their regional offices there. The UN has their headquarters there, the Environment Programme. A lot of people have a stake in Kenya continuing to be a successful, peaceful country. It's been a working democracy since independence, and within the East Africa region of the Horn, as you said, for example, under the current president, Kenya has established itself as a place where peace talks can take place, where it's taking an active role in the peace and stability of the region and the continent more widely. You probably heard the Ethiopian talks between the government and the Tigrayan front may take place there. They're involved in what's happening in Eastern DRC with Antony Blinken's visit this week. They're involved in the East African community on the commercial level. And globally speaking, also remember Kenya is still a member of the UN Security Council till the end of this year. And of course, there's massive global issues going on. So I think it's in everybody's interest, not just the West, as you said, but much more broadly, both within Africa and across the world, for this period to happen, for the election to take place, for there to be a peaceful, credible transition of power as soon as possible. Of course, the new president will bring in his new programme, but primarily for Kenya to continue moving forward as a stable country, exerting a positive influence in the region is important. That's why I said, in a sense, there's this secondary aspect, which is symbolic's maybe not the right word, but it's important that we see that a country like Kenya, which has established democracy for decades, is able to take that forward. We know that whatever the result of this election, there will be a transition of power because the former president is not standing. Constitutionally, he can't do, he hasn't done.
He's distanced himself from his deputy as well.
Credit to all involved for that. Yes. I mean, that's not something we can take for granted around the world at the moment. So whatever happens, the country, if you like, will need to pull off a peaceful transition of power from one president and his team to the next. It will be a he. And that has a deeper importance, I'm sure, for the kind of strengthening of democracy and the reputation, if you like, almost of democracy around the world.
So what's threatening that peace and stability in Kenya? What are some of the kind of glaringly obvious issues that is a security risk? You know, sometimes you've got to be careful when you're listening to scaremongering in the West, as the media likes to do here. But you know, there was so much fear that this could be violence that we saw terribly in 2007, and then again instances of it in 2017. Why is Kenya teetering on the edge of that?
Well, you're right. I think. I mean, everybody, you know, all of the above that I mentioned previously. Everybody gets nervous, starting with Kenyans themselves, I believe, when there's an election period, because we can remember some terrible periods of post-election violence, particularly, as you said, in late 2007 and early 2008. It seems, I think we all believe that, in a sense, everybody learnt from that we won't be going back to that. But I think to underline the threat of violence and insecurity, you really need to have a credible process. That means that the Electoral Commission has to run a transparent, open process that people can see what's going on. Bear in mind there are 6 different elections that happened on Tuesday, 6 different levels of elections. The focus, of course, will be on who's won the presidential slot. But there's actually 5 other complicated elections going on at regional, local level. And to be honest, for any country in the world, that would be a massive undertaking. I mean, we don't want to underestimate the task. But partly because of the history of concern about processes in the past, and partly because of the lack of trust in some parts of the system, I think until the result comes out and is seen to be credible, it will be a worrying time for people, not just in Kenya, of course, primarily, but for all the lovers and onlookers of Kenya around the world.
It seems to be going smoothly, apart from 1 or 2 instances that I'm not sure have been verified yet. So the country's Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission has estimated that only 60% of the 22.1 million eligible voters turned up to cast a ballot. In your opinion, what is causing the disillusionment of politics in Kenya? Not just in Kenya, across Africa and even here. Even here.
Well, I think you're right to put the question, if you like, in that kind of negative terms, disillusionment. I think actually the voter turnout may be edging up to sort of mid-60%, but that's still 15-20% down on what it was in the last full election in 2017. And as you've implied, I think, low turnout is normally not a good sign. It implies either voters were not able to register to vote in the first place, or they didn't bother to because, for whatever reason, they didn't perceive it as in their interests. Or they are, as you say, disillusioned. They don't believe that any of the candidates will actually change things. I mean, there could be a number of reasons, and I think it will be interesting when the results are in. There'll be a lot of close examination of what it's saying about the electoral process in Kenya, and I think, as you said, across Africa and even more broadly, because the reasons people don't vote can be numerous. They can be as simple as something went wrong on the day, but there may be longer-term structural reasons which need to be investigated.
It's fascinating, and we are holding our breath and keeping our fingers crossed, hoping that this is going to be a peaceful transition of power, because Kenya is such a dominant player in the region. Robin Gwynne, a former senior British diplomat and also the director of the communications firm White Leaf Solutions. Thank you so much for joining me in the studio today. Thanks, Robin.
Thanks.
Well, sadly, that's all we have time for today, but as always, do get in touch with your comments and suggestions. I'll see you at the same time next week for more in-depth business analysis on Channel's Business Global. Goodbye.